Before we add anything else, let's change the name of our layer. Double click where it says layer 1. We will call this Luke. Press enter to lock in that change. And now we'll add one more image. Now it occurs to me that we haven't saved in a while, so let's take a moment to go to File, Save, or Command S. So let's go to File, Open. Let's select Darth Vader, click Open. Make sure your Move tool is the active tool. Dragging that image out into its own window, clicking on it, dragging it over. I'm going to reposition it just a little bit so I'll be able to see the top, because I know I'm going to want to Command T to transform. Hold Shift, click and drag, and I don't want all of this, and I certainly don't want to include all this text, so I'm not going to worry about what I don't want to see. I'm not going to waste time editing that. I'm going to make some decisions about how I'm going to use this image, and I'm going to actually keep it quite large and take my best guess as to where I want it to be and press enter. So I'm going to try selecting the background of this image using the magic wand tool, set at the default tolerance of 32, and I'm going to click, and it's going to do a terrible job of selecting the background because the colors in the background are the exact same colors that are in the foreground in the image of Darth Vader. So I'm going to press Command D to deselect. So this is a pretty common scenario. There's many times where you're going to want to use an image and you want to get rid of the background, but you can't use the magic wand tool, you can't use one of our selection tools like the ellipse tool, so we need a different technique. So what we need is we need to use the eraser. Now the eraser tool shares a spot with some variations of the eraser tool, but we just want to use the eraser tool. You'll have a lot more control. And what's also nice is after our discussion about the eraser tool and some of the options you can modify, you'll also understand how to use the paintbrush tool. So we're going to make sure we have the eraser tool selected. And I'm going to move to the top of the window. And we want to make sure the mode says brush, not pencil or block. We want a brush mode because we can create a nice soft edge. And over here, this gives you a bit of a preview about what that brush shape is and the size. I'm going to zoom out again so I can see how large this eraser tool is set to right now, but there's other options that I might want to change. So I'm going to click right on this little preview and I'll zoom in on that. And here size, it's 14 pixels, and we know kind of how big that is. And of course we can change that size by clicking and dragging the slider, or our more advanced technique sometimes is to just click in that field and we can use our down and up arrow keys to change that size 1 pixel at a time, so you have lots of control. The hardness. What the hardness affects is how soft the edge of the brush is. So I'm going to just give you a quick little example. I'm going to set the hardness to 0. And I'm going to increase the brush size just so that the effect will be a lot more obvious. I'm going to zoom back out, and I'm just going to click and drag and then zoom in on that area. And you can see that with the softness set to 0, the edge is very, very soft, and it gradually goes from being transparent all the way to opaque again. So as I continue to erase, you can see what that looks like. I don't like the way that looks because if I have that soft edge along this image, it's just not going to create a nice clean composite. It's going to be too transparent around the edges. So I'm going to go back in time a number of steps to undo all this erasing that I don't want to keep. To do that, I'm going to hold my Command and Option key and press Z. And what this does is it moves you back in time multiple steps. And now I've undone that. So I need to change some of these options. So I'm going to click on here, and I'm going to change the hardness. Usually I work with about 85, but sometimes that changes depending upon the size of the brush and the size of area I'm trying to erase around. And right now there's lots of little picky places I've got to erase around this image of Darth Vader. So I'm going to change my size to something more appropriate. And as I work into some of the smaller corners, I might need to make the size even smaller. But I'm going to start with 12. Before I try to start erasing around this image of Darth Vader, I'm going to do something over here in my layers palette to make it easier to see what's going on. Each of these layers has a little eye icon next to it. And what I can do is I can selectively turn or hide temporarily the information on these layers. So I can click one at a time, or I can click and drag to select a whole bunch at the same time. And by doing that, when I start to erase, all you'll see is that white background showing up, so it becomes a lot more obvious what's going on. I'm going to zoom in on my image. You might think you have to use the eraser by clicking and dragging and trying to have a very steady hand, which is very difficult to do when you're dragging a mouse around, which isn't to say you couldn't do it, but I have a much easier way. So I'm going to Option-Command-Z to get rid of all those prior erasings. I'm going to show you a different way to use the eraser tool, and it's called the shift-click trick. And I'm just going to demonstrate over here, and then I'll move on to the figure in a moment. I'm just going to click once with the eraser, and of course it creates a little circular dot that shows the white background underneath. And then I'm going to hold my Shift key and click over here. And notice that what it does is it joins those 2 points with a straight line. And if I keep my Shift key held down, I can keep clicking and joining those points with a straight line. I'm going to Option-Command-Z till that all goes away. And you might be thinking, but I don't want to erase with straight lines. There's all sorts of curves here. But I can erase around curved edges, and I can do it really accurately. And this is how. I'm going to click once to let Photoshop know that's where I want to start to erase. And if I wanted to erase in sort of a curved form, I keep my Shift key held down, but instead of moving my cursor way away from that first point, I move it just a little bit, and move it a little bit further, and a little bit further. And notice that what I'm doing is I'm just clicking, and I'm letting that little Shift key fill in the gaps between those areas that I click. And what's nice about this is I can take my time and decide exactly where I need to line up that brush before I click, and I can be as accurate and as careful as I need to be. I'm going to Option-Command-Z to undo all that erasing, and let's take it for a test drive over here. So I'm looking at the top of his head here, and I'm going to start erasing by clicking here. And then I'm going to move the cursor just a little bit, and I'm just taking my time, not clicking until I'm happy with the positioning. Click, 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 and so on. So I'm just going to do this really quick, so it's not going to be quite as accurate as I would usually make it. And now here's an area where it's nice and straight. So the last point I clicked on was right over here. I'm going to hold my Shift key, and now I can move it much further away because I do actually want to erase in a straight line. And then once I get back to a portion that's curved, I'm back to just moving in smaller increments. Now, this is a little tedious. It's not as easy as clicking with the magic wand tool and pressing your delete key. But if you start to really care about the image quality and how things are looking in your work, then you'll want to take the time to do this. So now we have a situation where this space is really starting to close in. So this is when I want to change the size of my brush or my eraser tool. Rather than going all the way back up to click on that little brush tool icon, or the brush preset picker, instead I'm going to keep my mouse, my cursor close to where I'm already erasing. I'm just going to right click. And then I can change the size. It needs to be a little smaller to fit into that smallest spot. And once I'm happy with it, then I can just click back into my composition, and I can continue shift clicking around my image. As soon as areas start to flatten out, I can move the mouse further. The only thing you have to remember when you're using the shift click technique is if you want to start erasing on a different side or area of the image, you let go of the shift key and you're starting that whole process again. So I'm clicking once to let Photoshop know I want to start to erase around this area, and then I hold my shift key and start shift clicking around my image. If I don't let go of that shift key and I decide I want to go over to here and start erasing, well, it's going to connect those 2 points in a straight line. So just remember to let go of your shift key first, and then you can start erasing a different area. So what I'd like you to do now is try using that shift-click trick and erase around the image of Darth Vader. And pause the video now. And once you finish erasing, we'll talk about our next steps. Now that you've finished erasing all the way around the image, and now we just have these large areas to get rid of, there's a couple of things we can do. We can right-click and increase the size of our brush so that it's huge, and we can just quickly erase large areas away. Sometimes you can use one of your selection tools, like the rectangular marquee tool, and I can use that to select a huge area and press delete to get rid of that. So you can mix and match whatever methods of erasing or selecting and deleting that work best. And I just want to make sure that when I have this brush this big that I'm not getting too close to the edges, because I might affect the edges that I've already erased. So right click, change the size, and by doing that you should be able to quite quickly get rid of all of that stuff. Don't be afraid to zoom in when accuracy counts. And I'm just going to keep doing that until it's all gone. Now that I've finished erasing all the way around the image, I'm going to want to save, so I'm going to press Command S to save. You can always go to the File menu, but Command S is faster. And now it's bonus time. And here's your first bonus. I'm going to press Command plus to zoom in on my image. And when I'm erasing or painting or doing any sort of editing, anytime I want to work in a zoomed in mode, it's really tedious having to use these scroll bars to navigate around the image. It's slow, it's kind of kludgy. I just absolutely never use scroll bars. What I do instead is I hold down my space bar. And when I do that, this little hand icon appears. It's called the grabber hand, because what it lets you do is, when you see it, click down with your mouse and drag your mouse, and you can move and reposition your artwork to wherever you want. And in this case, oh, I noticed an area that I missed, so I'm going to reselect my eraser tool and just get rid of that. Second bonus tip is, and this happens a lot, every once in a while you'll select a painting tool, the eraser tool, one of the tools, and you're used to seeing it display in a particular way. But instead of seeing a circle for the paintbrush or the eraser tool, you see this, and you have no idea how big your brush is. And the reason why it's displaying this way is because I have my caps lock key on. Once I remove the caps lock key, then my icon, my cursor displays like I expect it to. So whenever you see this, press your caps lock key, and chances are that was the problem.